The first thing I saw was the red dot trembling on my steering wheel. It came from a rifle behind me. 3 police cruisers had boxed my car against the concrete shoulder of Interstate 70. Their lights turned the falling snow red, blue. A voice from a loudspeaker ordered me to shut off the engine, throw my keys through the window, and keep both hands where the officers could see them. I did exactly what they said. I did not argue. I did not reach for my phone. I did not even turn my head. I sat there with my palms pressed against the wheel while cold air poured through the open window and froze the sweat on my face. Then an officer shouted, "Driver, do not move. The vehicle has been reported stolen. You may be armed." That was when I understood this was not a normal traffic stop. The car was mine. I had bought it 3 years earlier with money I earned installing security systems for hospitals and government buildings. The registration was in my name. The insurance was in my name. The monthly payments had come from my bank account until I paid off the loan 6 months earlier. Nobody could honestly believe I had stolen it, but someone had called the police and told them otherwise. Boots crunched through the snow behind me. A woman's voice ordered the other officers to hold their positions. I saw her reflection in my side mirror as she approached with her weapon raised. She moved carefully until she reached my window. Then she looked inside. Her expression changed. The weapon lowered. "Julian," she said. I recognized Captain Elena Brooks before she removed her winter glasses. She had been a patrol officer 10 years earlier when I installed the alarm system at her mother's bakery. Since then, we had crossed paths at city events, charity drives, and security conferences. She knew my work. She knew my record. More importantly, she knew my family. Her eyes moved from my face to my hands. What did they do this time? The question hit me harder than the sirens. I swallowed and said, "I don't know yet." Alina turned slightly and spoke into her radio. "Verify the registered owner again. Do not rely only on the caller's statement." A dispatcher answered a few seconds later. The registration came back to me. Elena asked for the reporting party. Then the dispatcher said, "The complainants are Daniel and Rebecca Hale, my parents." The cold inside the car seemed to sink into my bones. Elena holstered her weapon, opened my door, and told me to step out slowly. One of the officers recovered my keys from the road. Another searched the car after I gave permission. They found no weapon, no drugs, and nothing illegal. But the damage had already been done. Drivers passing on the highway had seen me surrounded by armed police. Someone had probably recorded it. One wrong movement could have ended my life. Elena moved me behind a cruiser, away from the wind. "Tell me what happened before tonight," she said. I looked at the date on the dashboard screen. Friday. Exactly 3 days earlier, my parents had called a family meeting. My mother had sent the message at 6 in the morning. "DINRATSVIMRTNT, DO not be loot." That was how Rebecca Hale communicated when she wanted obedience. She used short sentences and capital letters, as if family relationships were emergency orders. I drove to my parents' house after work. They lived in a large brick home outside Kansas City, in a neighborhood where every lawn looked professionally measured and every porch light seemed chosen by a committee. My father sat at the head of the dining table. My mother sat beside him. My older brother Cameron was across from them with his wife Paige. No food had been served. That should have warned me. My father folded his hands and said, "Your brother needs temporary help." Cameron gave me the same confident smile he had used since high school whenever he wanted something from me. He had always been the charming one, the athlete, the favorite, the son whose mistakes became learning experiences. I was the practical one. When Cameron wrecked our father's truck at 17, my parents blamed the road. When he dropped out of college, they blamed the professors. When he lost his first business, they blamed his partner. When I worked 2 jobs to pay tuition and graduated with honors, my mother told relatives that I had been lucky. What kind of help? I asked. Cameron leaned forward. $15,000. I'll pay you back in 90 days. I laughed once, because I honestly thought he was joking. He was wearing a watch that cost more than my first car. His new SUV was parked outside. Paige had posted photographs from a resort in Mexico less than a month earlier. My father's jaw tightened. This is serious. So am I said. Why do you need $15,000? Cameron said a client had delayed payment on a major contract. He needed cash to protect his company until the money arrived. What company? His smile disappeared. He had launched so many businesses that even he seemed to forget which one he was pretending to run. There had been a fitness brand, a real estate seminar, a luxury car rental service, and something involving cryptocurrency. My mother touched my arm. You have savings. I have plans for those savings. I was preparing to buy a small warehouse and expand my security business. I had spent 9 years building the company from a rented garage. $15,000 was not spare cash. It was the deposit on my future. Cameron is family, she said. So am I. My father pushed his chair back. You would not have your business without us. That was false. He had refused to lend me $500 when I started. I had sold my motorcycle and worked nights instead. I looked at Cameron. Sell the SUV. His face hardened. That vehicle is part of my image. Then your image is worth $15,000. Paige covered her mouth, but I could not tell whether she was hiding a laugh or fear. My father stood. You will transfer the money tonight. No. The room became silent. My mother stared at me as though I had slapped her. Cameron rose and pointed across the table. You think you're better than us because you save every penny. No, I said. I think I'm responsible for my own choices. You should be responsible for yours. My father walked around the table until he was inches from me. When this family gave you a place to live, food, and a name, we made an investment. It is time for you to return it. I stepped back. Children are not investments. His face turned red. You walk out that door and there will be consequences. I left anyway. For 3 days nobody called me. Then my own parents reported my car stolen and told the police I might be armed. Standing beside the cruiser, I told Elena everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked toward my car. Was either of your parents ever listed on the title? My father co-signed the original loan because the bank gave me a lower rate, but I refinanced 2 years ago and removed him. Do you have the updated title? In my office safe, Elena nodded. I believe you, but belief is not enough. We need documents. Her radio crackled. Another officer approached and quietly handed her a printed dispatch summary. She read it twice, then she looked at me. Julian, your parents did not simply say the car was stolen. What else did they say? They told dispatch you threatened to shoot Cameron if he tried to recover it. I felt my stomach drop. I don't own a gun. I know. They know that too. The Elena folded the paper. This was designed as a high-risk stop. I looked at the officers, the rifles, and the lights flashing against the snow. My parents had not been trying to inconvenience me. They had created a situation where fear, confusion, and one sudden movement could have killed me. My phone rang inside the car. Elena retrieved it and checked the screen. Mum, I stared at the name. Answer it, Elena said. Put it on speaker. I accepted the call. My mother did not ask whether I was alive. She said, Are you ready to be reasonable now? Elena's expression became completely still. I forced my voice to remain calm. What did you tell the police? My mother sighed. Your father told them what was necessary to protect family property. The car is mine. Then prove it or transfer the money and we will correct the misunderstanding. My blood turned cold. This was not panic, it was extortion. I looked at Alina. Her body camera was recording. "What happens if I refuse?" I asked. My mother's voice became softer. "You have a good business, Julian. A good reputation. It would be sad if people started asking how you really got your contracts." The call ended. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Elena said, "They just made my job much easier." I thought she meant the false report. I was wrong. The stolen car lie was only the first door my parents had opened. Behind it was something much larger. Elena released me after the title records were confirmed through the state database. Because I was shaking too badly to drive, an officer took me home while another brought my car. I did not sleep. At 2 in the morning, I froze my credit, changed every banking password, and reviewed my accounts. At 3:17, I found the first sign that my parents' plan had started before the family meeting. Someone had tried to access my business savings account 6 times in the previous week. The attempts came from an internet address registered near my parents' neighborhood. At 4, I found a new payee added to my online banking profile. The name was Husaacltngro. I had never heard of it. The account had been scheduled to receive a transfer of exactly $15,000 at 8 the next morning. I canceled the transfer and called the bank's fraud department. The representative asked whether anyone else had access to my old recovery email. That was when I remembered the email address I had used in college. My mother had helped me create it when I was 18. She knew the answers to the original security questions. My first pet, my childhood street, my father's middle name. Information parents are supposed to protect had become a key they could use against me. By sunrise, I had secured the account. At 8:15, my office manager, Denise, called. "Julian, there are 2 detectives here." My heart started pounding again. What do they want? They have questions about city contracts. I drove to my office with Alina's advice, repeating in my head, "Do not destroy anything. Do not guess. Do not speak without counsel if they accuse you of a crime." The detectives were waiting in my conference room. They showed me copies of invoices that appeared to come from my company. According to the documents, I had overcharged a public hospital by more than $80,000 and sent the extra money to a private account. The signatures looked like mine. The company logo was correct. The project numbers were real, but the invoices were false. I explained that all hospital billing passed through a secure accounting platform. Every invoice had a digital signature and an audit trail. One detective asked to inspect the system. I gave them access. Within 20 minutes, Denise found the truth. The fake invoices had been printed from PDFs. They had never existed inside our accounting software. Someone had copied public contract information and created convincing documents outside our network. The detectives' attitude changed. They asked who might want to damage me. I gave them my parents' names. Then I gave them Cameron's. At 10, Cameron called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. "You should have paid when we asked. Now it's going to cost you more." I forwarded the recording to Alina. At noon, I met with an attorney named Miriam Cole. She specialized in financial fraud and family coercion. She listened to the recordings, reviewed the bank access attempts, and studied the false police report. Then she asked one question nobody else had asked. "Why 15,000? My brother says it's for his company." People do not usually risk felony charges for a small business loan they could obtain legally. 15,000 is specific. It sounds like a deadline. What kind of deadline? Tax payment, settlement, loan default, criminal debt. We need to know where the money was supposed to go. She searched the state business database. Horizon Consulting Group had been created 7 months earlier. The registered agent was Paige Hale, Cameron's wife. Its address was not their home. It was a mailbox inside a shipping store. Miriam searched court records next. Cameron was being sued by 3 former clients. They accused him of collecting deposits for commercial renovation projects, then disappearing without completing the work. The total amount missing was nearly $400,000. I stared at the screen. Why would he need only $15,000? Miriam opened another filing. A judge had ordered Cameron to produce his full financial records by Monday morning. If he failed, the court could freeze his accounts and refer evidence of fraud to prosecutors. The $15,000 was meant for a man named Victor Sloan, a former accountant who had worked for Cameron. Sloan had possession of the original company ledger. Cameron was not trying to save his business. He was trying to buy the ledger before the court could see it. That evening, I drove to Cameron's house. I did not go to confront him. I went because Paige had texted me 3 words. P.S. Clamalo. She opened the door before I knocked. Her eyes were swollen from crying. The house behind her looked expensive, but half the rooms were empty. Paintings were missing from the walls. Furniture had been removed. They're selling everything quietly, she said. Who? Cameron and your parents. She led me into the kitchen and locked the door. On the counter sat a laptop and a stack of envelopes. Paige told me Cameron's businesses had been failing for years. My parents had protected him by lending money, moving debts between companies, and convincing relatives to invest. When investors demanded repayment, my father created new companies and shifted the remaining money. It was a family-operated pyramid of lies. Why are you telling me now? I asked. Because last night Cameron said the police might have to shoot you before you understood. The room tilted around me. Paige wiped her face. He was drinking. Your father told him the stop would scare you. Cameron said if you reached for something, the problem might solve itself. I gripped the back of a chair. My own brother had imagined my death as a solution. Paige turned the laptop toward me. Horizon is my company only on paper. Cameron created it using my identity. He moves money through it so creditors cannot trace him. She opened a folder containing scanned checks, wire receipts, and messages. One message from my father read Lan has 86 km busen esras arvis, ONCB bidui biraik I'm ashi wiles poi. Another from my mother said USETH car first. IESTRI al idili elediawan. Then I saw the message that explained everything. It was from Cameron to my father. Fiorti leggrant trescup derivi. Ifamui do none oby fradu kosto tietrikoyu. My parents had sent armed police after me because they needed to purchase evidence of their own crimes. I photographed every message. Paige gave me a copy of the files on a flash drive. Before I left, she grabbed my arm. They know I contacted you. How? Cameron checks the doorbell camera. Headlights swept across the kitchen wall. A vehicle stopped outside. Paige went pale. He's home. The front door slammed. Cameron shouted her name. I slipped through the back door and crossed the dark yard. I had almost reached my car when Cameron came around the side of the house, holding a metal tire iron. You ruined everything, he yelled. He swung before I could answer. The tire iron struck my shoulder and knocked me against the car. I fell, rolled, and heard it smash the window above my head. Cameron raised it again. Then Paige screamed from the porch. Stop! The police are coming. Cameron froze. There were no sirens, but he believed her. I kicked the tire iron away, got into my car, and locked the doors. He punched the window as I started the engine. You think you won, he shouted. Date already has your company. I drove away with pain burning through my shoulder. At the emergency room, the doctor diagnosed a deep bruise, but no fracture. Alina arrived before midnight. I handed her the flash drive. She inserted it into an evidence bag and said, "This changes the case." "No," I said. "It explains the case." She looked at the bruise spreading across my shoulder. "You need to disappear for a few days. I have employees. You have parents who created an armed police response, and a brother who attacked you with a weapon. They are escalating." She was right, but disappearing was exactly what my parents wanted. They wanted me isolated, frightened, and silent. So I decided to give them the opposite. Next morning, I called my mother. "I'll pay," I said. She became warm immediately. "That's the right decision. I want the police report corrected first." "Of course. And I want everyone present when I transfer the money." "You, Dad, Cameron, and Paige." My mother hesitated. "Why Paige?" "Because the account belongs to Horizon Consulting. I need the legal owner there." She agreed to meet Sunday evening at my parents' house. What she did not know was that Paige had already left Cameron. With help from Miriam, she moved to a secure hotel and began cooperating with investigators. What my mother also did not know was that Victor Sloan, the accountant, had never intended to sell the ledger. The $15,000 demand had been bait. Sloan had discovered the missing client money months earlier. Cameron threatened him and blamed him for the fraud. Sloan copied the ledger, resigned, and contacted federal investigators. The message saying he wanted money was part of a controlled operation. Investigators wanted Cameron and my parents to admit why they needed the ledger. But when Cameron could not raise the money, my parents chose me as their emergency source. Their false stolen car report connected the financial conspiracy to an act of violent coercion. Their plan to scare me had given investigators the missing evidence of intent. On Sunday, I arrived at my parents' house at 6:55. My father opened the door wearing a suit. He smiled like a banker greeting a nervous client. "I knew you would come to your senses." The dining room had been prepared like a celebration. Wine glasses stood beside polished plates. My mother had cooked my favorite meal from childhood. That was her method. She mixed comfort with control, until you could not tell where love ended and fear began. Cameron stood near the fireplace with his injured hand wrapped in a bandage. He glared at me. "Where is Paige?" my mother asked. "She'll be here when she's ready." My father pointed to a chair. "Sit down." On the table was a laptop, a notary stamp, and 3 documents. The first was a loan agreement for $15,000. The second said, "I accepted responsibility for damaging Cameron's business reputation." The third said the stolen car report resulted from an innocent misunderstanding and that I would not pursue charges. I read them slowly. "You want me to pay and sign away my right to tell the truth." My father poured wine. "We want peace." "No. You want protection." Cameron stepped forward. "Sign it." I looked at my mother. "Did you know the police thought I was armed?" She looked away. "Your father handled the details." "Did you know they aimed rifles at me?" "We expected you to cooperate." "And if I had panicked?" Her eyes finally met mine. "You always make everything dramatic." That sentence killed the last piece of hope I had been carrying. Until then, some part of me still wanted to believe she had not understood the danger. I wanted to believe my father had lied to her, or Cameron had exaggerated, or the call had grown out of control. But she knew. She simply believed her need for money mattered more than my life. My father tapped the papers. "Enough. Transfer the funds." I opened my laptop. On the screen was a banking page showing $15,000 ready to move. Cameron leaned closer. My father watched the account number. My mother stood behind me with one hand on my chair. I said, "Before I send it, I need the full story." My father's face tightened. "What story? Why does Victor Sloan have a ledger worth $15,000? Cameron looked at my father. That glance told me more than words. My father said, "You don't understand business. Explain it." "It contains confidential records. Records of the client deposits Cameron stole." Cameron slammed his palm on the table. "I didn't steal anything." "Then why are 3 clients suing you?" My mother moved between us. "This family will not be destroyed by outsiders." The clients are not outsiders. They are victims. My father's voice became quiet. Your brother made mistakes. We corrected them. Be moving money through Paige's identity. Cameron stared at me. How do you know that? I did not answer. My father closed the laptop. This meeting is over. No, I said. It's finally starting. I reached into my jacket and placed a small audio recorder on the table. My mother gasped. Cameron lunged for it. I pushed my chair back. The dining room doors opened. Paige walked in with Miriam beside her. My brother stopped moving. Paige looked at him with a calmness I had never seen before. I gave them everything, she said. Cameron's face collapsed. My father pointed at her. You stupid girl. Do you understand what you've done? Yes, she said. I stopped being your shield. My mother rushed toward the front windows. 2 dark vehicles were parked along the street. She closed the curtains. My father turned to me. You brought police into this house. You brought them into my life when you reported my car stolen. His expression changed. The controlled father disappeared. In his place was a frightened man who had spent years believing fear belonged only to other people. He picked up the loan agreement and tore it in half. There, no loan, no problem. Miriam stepped forward. The problem is not the loan. My father looked toward the hallway. Elena entered with 2 detectives. She was not in uniform. She did not need to be. One detective identified himself as part of a joint financial crimes task force. He explained that they had warrants for the house, the computers, the phones, and all business records connected to Cameron, Horizon Consulting, and 6 other companies. My mother sat down heavily. Cameron backed toward the kitchen. Elena said, "Do not run." He ran. He made it through the kitchen, out the back door, and halfway across the yard before officers stopped him near the fence. From inside the dining room, we heard him screaming that the family had betrayed him. My father did not move. The detective asked him to place his hands behind his back. My mother began crying, not for me, not for the people who had lost their savings, not for Paige. She cried because neighbors were gathering outside. What will people think? She whispered. I looked at her and finally understood the center of her world. Appearance. Not loyalty, not love. Appearance. As officers searched the house, they found a locked filing cabinet in my father's office. Inside were copies of driver's licenses, tax returns, bank statements, and signed forms belonging to relatives, former employees, and church friends. My parents had not protected Cameron only once. For years, they had used other people's identities to open accounts, hide money, and cover losses. They had turned trust into a financial resource. Then an officer found a folder with my name on it. Inside were documents from when I was 19. My mother had used my social security number to open a business credit card. The account had defaulted, but my father had quietly paid the balance before it appeared on my credit report. They had been testing access to my identity for more than a decade. The false car report was not a sudden mistake. It was the moment their old methods finally became visible. The arrests were only the beginning. My parents hired expensive attorneys and told relatives that I had destroyed the family over a small loan. Cameron claimed I had framed him because I was jealous. My mother posted long messages online about ungrateful children and the pain of being betrayed by someone you raised. For a few weeks, some relatives believed her. Then the evidence became public. The recorded phone call after the traffic stop showed that my mother offered to correct the misunderstanding if I paid. Dispatch records showed that my father described me as armed even though he knew I did not own a gun. Paige's files showed years of hidden transfers. Victor Sloan's ledger connected those transfers to stolen client deposits. The documents in my father's cabinet identified 11 people whose information had been used without permission. One of them was my aunt, who had spent years believing her late husband had secretly created debt before he died. Another was a retired employee who had lost his home after a loan appeared under his name. My parents had built their comfortable life on disasters they assigned to other people. Federal prosecutors offered Cameron a deal if he testified against them. He accepted in less than 48 hours. That was the final betrayal my parents never expected. They had protected him his entire life. They had excused every failure, paid every debt, and punished anyone who challenged him. But the moment prison became real, Cameron protected only himself. He admitted that my father directed the false police report. He admitted that my mother gave him my old email security answers. He admitted that they planned to send the fake hospital invoices to local reporters if I still refused to pay. He also admitted something I had not known. After the traffic stop, Cameron had followed the police scanner online. When he heard officers describe a possibly armed suspect, he laughed. That fact stayed with me longer than anything else. My brother had listened while strangers prepared to shoot me. And he laughed. My parents eventually pleaded guilty to identity theft, conspiracy, filing a false police report, attempted extortion, and financial fraud. My father received a long federal sentence. My mother received less time because she cooperated after Cameron testified, but the judge refused to treat her as a passive participant. At sentencing, she asked to speak. She turned toward me and said, "We made mistakes because we loved our family too much." I stood when the judge allowed me to respond. "No," I said. "You loved control. Family was only the word you used to hide it." My mother began crying. This time, I felt nothing. Cameron was sentenced separately. His cooperation reduced his prison time, but he lost his businesses, vehicles, house, and professional licenses. Paige divorced him and started over in another state. The victims received compensation from the sale of my parents' house and other seized property. It was not enough to restore everything. Money could not return lost years, broken marriages, or damaged reputations. But truth gave people something they had been denied: the knowledge that their suffering had not been their fault. My company survived too. The hospital publicly confirmed that the invoices were fraudulent. The city renewed my contracts after an independent audit cleared me. I promoted Denise to operations director and expanded the company without touching the money my brother had demanded. 6 months later, I bought the warehouse. On the day we opened it, Alina stopped by. She stood beside the front door and looked at the new security sign bearing my company's name. "You know," she said, "most people would hate police after what happened." I hated the lie. I told her. "Not the people who uncovered it." She nodded. Then she handed me a small cardboard box. Inside was the key I had thrown from my car window during the traffic stop. An officer had found it in the snow after the road was cleared. I held it in my palm. For months, I had remembered that key as the moment I lost control. But now it meant something different. It reminded me that control could be taken for a moment without being lost forever. I framed the key and hung it in the lobby of the warehouse. Under it, I placed a small metal plaque. It reads, "Totrnmy with ENTOHEIRPROPD was THENHT. I fina fidel stoped keligishotarolovi." People sometimes ask whether revenge felt satisfying. The truth is, watching my parents led away in handcuffs did not heal me. Hearing Cameron beg for a deal did not return the years I spent trying to earn love from people who only valued obedience. The satisfaction came later. It came when my aunt learned her husband had not betrayed her. It came when the retired employee received enough money to move into a safe apartment. It came when Paige testified without lowering her eyes. It came when I stopped feeling guilty for surviving what my family had designed. Justice was not the moment they lost everything. Justice was the moment their victims got their names back. And as for the $15,000, I never gave Cameron a cent. Instead, I used that exact amount to create an emergency legal fund for people targeted by financial abuse inside their own families. My parents wanted that money to bury evidence. I used it to help other people uncover the truth. That was the only revenge I needed. They tried to send armed officers after me because I refused to finance their lies. In the end, the sirens they called for me became the sound of their own empire collapsing.